agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney Jay Carson.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how you doing?
I'm about as wiped out after this week as Bill Barr is after his, I think.
Yeah, he did have a big week. Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that for sure. But before we do, we of course want to thank our newest sustaining supporter, Jack. Jack, thank you very much. And as a Patreon supporter, you get not only that second full-length episode every week, you also get ad-free versions of all of our shows, as well as other things at different levels of support. And to become a supporter, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. And as always, if you'd like to hear our weekly bonus show, but you can't afford to support the show financially right now, it's totally not a problem. Just email me, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will make that happen for you. And if a monthly pledge is too much of a commitment, or you just like to support us on a one-time or recurring basis, but don't like Patreon for whatever reason, there's also our PayPal option. You'll find the link at politicsguys.com/support. Of course, all those URLs are always in our show notes. And one thing that helps us out enormously, and that's absolutely free, is you're spreading the word by sharing episodes on social media. You know, it only takes a few seconds, and it is unquestionably the best sort of advertising. And Jay, speaking of advertising, if you're not a Patreon supporter getting our ad-free shows, you've probably noticed that we've had a number of in-episodes ads over the last few months, and there will be more of them to come. Please know that unlike our early days when remember you and I tried to do our own kind of free-form, extra long ads that everyone said, God, please make it stop.
It was pretty funny.
Yeah, we enjoyed it, yeah, but clearly listeners didn't. But now I do try to make them succinct as possible. We only accept ads from businesses we feel comfortable supporting. And, we just don't chill for anyone who opens their wallet. And also, these ads are an important source of financial support for us. And so the more of them you listen to and the more often you get stuff we advertise using that link you'll hear at the end of the ad, the easier it is for us to keep the podcast going. So thanks so much. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start by talking about a late-breaking story. On Friday, U.S. District Court Judge Nicholas Garoufis, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a Bill Clinton appointee to the bench, issued an order directing the Department of Homeland Security to announce by Monday that it is resuming the approval of new DACA applications and work permits. He also ordered DHS to return to its past practice of granting and extending DACA status for 2 years at a time. You might recall, I'm sure, Jay, you recall that this June, in a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court held that the Trump administration had not followed procedural requirements in ending the program. And Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote for the majority, said, "We do not decide whether DACA or its rescission are sound policies. The wisdom of those decisions is none of our concern, at least not at this point. Here we address."
I like that kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. He said, "Here we address only whether the administration complied with the procedural requirements in the law that insist on a reasoned explanation for its action." Now, my sense of things, Jay, is that this decision probably won't have a major impact because Joe Biden's going to be president in 46 days. God, thank you. And he's committed to resuming.
Count your chickens a little early.
It could be a long 46 days, but Biden is clearly committed to resuming the DACA program. And also, assuming that the Trump administration isn't too distracted by the election-related stuff and President Trump still cares, the Trump administration certainly can appeal this decision. And then finally, there's also still a case to be decided in the Texas federal district court where multiple Republican attorneys general are arguing that the DACA program itself is unlawful. And so there's a lot going on here, but we also know that at this point, or at least at one point, the idea of giving Dreamers legal status through legislation, not executive action, was certainly a possibility for bipartisan legislation, and there's strong public support for this, not just among Democrats, but also among Republicans as well. So Jay, how do you see this all kind of working itself out?
Well, I mean, you're right. And this decision isn't particularly breaking new ground. It's sort of just affirming, hey, we're going back to the status quo, which is appropriate, right? Given how the Supreme Court's ordered, and so forth. Now, again, this was, as you said, late breaking, so I haven't read the whole decision yet to see if there's anything else in there that sort of would be, expanding beyond what the prior DACA program was. But my sense is that, just from the summaries I've read, that it isn't. Does this help with getting a legislative fix? I would say, sadly, probably not, right? I wouldn't see that there would be much incentive for the Biden administration to pursue a legislative fix if the regulatory fix is already in there. Now, there are still other cases out there. You mentioned the Texas one, and then there was also, the Fourth Circuit had ruled against DACA, a year ago. So, there likely will be other challenges to it based on its merits. How those play out is going to be something else.
It's a weird situation, Jay, because I think what we both agree on is that it's an illegal program that was illegally terminated. So I mean,
exactly. Yeah, I think. Well, I might disagree with you on the illegal termination piece of it, but yeah, I think that's
I mean, I think that's sort of where
it was essentially the rationale is that President Obama exceeded his presidential authority in creating the program, and Trump exceeded his presidential authority in trying to get rid of it.
Well, I wouldn't say exceeded. Trump didn't exceed his authority, but as always,
check the boxes he had to.
Yeah, the Trump administration basically kind of tore out the Administrative Procedures Act and sort of, used it to make spitballs or something like that. But they're not big fans of it, certainly, and this is another one of those examples. And so,
I don't know if it's. I think it's less a thing of being big fans and more just of a can no one here play this game? That kind of thing. There could have been a way to do it pretty easily. You just make the right, or I shouldn't say easily, because you could always run into some judicial resistance. But by the time you get to the Supreme Court, you could have a decent record. But yeah, that's the point. It's just a matter of showing your work, essentially, right? Making these findings of fact and saying, here's why we're doing this, and here's the reason, and here's what we're considering in doing this. And they didn't do that.
Right.
So
now, some might argue that DACA was different because, the case from Jeff Sessions, remember Jeff Sessions was that we don't need to show our work because if the program in the first place was illegal, then we don't have to justify ending an illegal program, which is different than promulgating or removing other regulations.
Right. Which I actually think that's a pretty damn good argument, right? But I guess there were 5 justices who didn't think so.
I'm with Chief Justice Roberts on this one, though I do think that when it does reach the court on the merits, which I expect to happen at some point, that the court will rule that DACA is not within the executive's authority to implement, would be my sense. There might be a couple of years before it gets to that point, but until that point, I don't see a legislative fix. And I do see, like you would say, President Biden kind of, using that. So, all right, let's move on to signs of progress in what has been a months-long stalemate on another round of COVID relief. Earlier this week, there was a bipartisan group of senators who put forward a $908 billion stimulus framework. Now, that's significantly less than the over $2 trillion HEROES Act that the House passed in October, and that itself was a reduction of the original $3.4 trillion HEROES Act that the House passed in May. And the Senate Republican response, which didn't emerge until late October, calls for around $500 billion in funding, as well as pretty extensive liability protection for businesses. And even though the compromise proposal has far less spending than most Democrats want, it might not be enough to attract enough support from Senate Republicans. And in my view, Jay, there are 2 reasons for this. Number one, concerns over spending nearly $1 trillion after already around $3 trillion has been authorized by Congress. And then there's also, I think, the concern from a lot of Republicans that we want to see very robust COVID business liability protection as opposed to the much less, the much weaker protection, I guess Republicans would call it, that's been suggested in the compromise proposal. And there's been a lot of talk that this will be kind of made part of the fiscal year 2021 budget, and that is the continuing resolution ends on December 11th. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot of hope for this happening anytime soon, but I want to get your take on it.
I'm sticking with my prediction that I think it gets done before the end of the year. I may be wrong, but I'm being bold in saying that, and I think so far so good. What I predicted has come to pass. That both sides will look at this and say, listen, there is a real need to get something done. Democrats should look at this and say, hey, there's no real downside, because if we are able to gain control of the Senate, well, we'll just do something more when we get there. If not, then we can say we've done something now that maybe helps our chances. So yeah, if I'm the Democrats, there's that's sort of the I guess advantage they have. There can never be enough money spent. So Nancy Pelosi can just pass another $3 trillion dollar bill in January, and they'll run that up the flagpole. And I think Republicans might well be able to make a good case of, hey, look, we've really done a whole lot. We've really gone to the mat here and spent more than we certainly would have wanted to. But now with these new proposals, you're just not going to get anything. So I think there's something that can still get done. Now, is it going to be a targeted is it going to be a big deal, or is it going to be targeted? My sense would it would be smaller and targeted.
I think maybe a lot of congressional Democrats feel like this is going to be the last stimulus package, and no matter what the size is, and so it's going to be better to hold out until sometime in February and be in a position to get a lot more what they think is needed than to kind of pass something very small now to have to basically, I mean, they've already moved down a ton from their original proposal. And I really think that the business liability thing is going to be the huge thing. I don't see McConnell and Senate Republicans moving much at all on that. And I think Democrats are going to say, we've moved down. We've basically come way down toward your position. We've compromised a lot more. And your position is basically, well, our compromise is if you want any stimulus, do what we want. And that includes the liability protection. And I think if Senate Republicans were willing to bend on the liability protection, not to eliminate it, but to make it a lot less extensive, then we could see a smaller deal perhaps. But I just don't see Senate Republicans doing that.
No, and I would argue nor should they, because I think that's a fight they win, right? I think when you come down to the when this kind of hits and then the arguments start running, and this might be the arguments we might have in a couple weeks. But Republicans can say, hey, look, we're ready to give you a stimulus. We're ready to write you a check, America. But they want to hold it up for the tort lawyers to go and put your company out of business.
But that works the other way too.
I think it's a good argument. I think so. That's what I'm saying. I think when you reach that point, I think Republicans win at least to a greater extent. If you're looking at where the line gets drawn, and you're right, it's not a line between zero protection and 100% protection. It's somewhere in between. But I think that line gets drawn close to where Mitch McConnell wants it than where Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer want it.
Right. So basically, it seems like the compromise will be essentially Democrats. In your view, the compromise should be Democrats basically acceding to everything Republicans want.
What did you listen to what I just said?
Well, yeah, I mean, but
I said that the line would be drawing closer to where Mitch McConnell wants
right.
it. Then
that's what I'm saying.
I think that's not acceding to everything Republicans said.
Okay, you're right. Everything was everything, but basically, it seems like almost all the compromise here is coming from the left, and almost none of it is coming from the right. Is my point, and you think that's how it should be.
Well, no. I am giving you my steely-eyed view here of what's going to happen.
Okay. Well, if you
so I mean, I
fair
think,
enough.
Yeah, I think that. Look, the Republicans just came up $400 billion, which is a lot of billions. I think there is probably still room to move from that on the money part. The liability issue is going to be trickier, but I think it can get done. And I think there are a lot of Democrats who don't want to be seen as putting out a sop to the plaintiff's bar in the midst of COVID. I think that plays poorly in some districts. And I if you ask me, do I think it's good policy? I think it's bad policy as well. So I think we get a deal, and then I think the Democrats also have the consolation that, well, you said there's the last stimulus bill, Mike. There's no such thing as the final stimulus bill. There's always another one coming, right?
Well, no, I disagree about that. I mean, there's certainly government spending is never going to end, and nor should it. But I believe that there's a good chance that this will be the last big COVID stimulus bill.
So, well, I disagree. I think that on day one of the new Congress, the House will likely introduce, no matter what happens here, the House will likely introduce another bigger, better COVID stimulus bill, and we'll have this conversation again in January and February.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think that the willingness of a number of moderate, or of a key number, even if it's a small number, of moderate Democrats in the Senate to go along with that sort of thing is going to be much less, even if we pass something like $500 billion. So that's my sense of things. I think it's a tough decision for Democrats, because it is a question of, well, there's, as we've talked about in past shows, that there is a desperate need, especially with certain programs ending by the end of the year. And that does put a lot of pressure on them. But then on the other hand, you think, well, do we accede to that and take care of these people when we know longer term there could be even greater negative consequences? And so this is not, to me, if I were voting on this would be a really tough decision for me to make. And I do not envy Senate Democrats who have to vote on this.
Okay.
But we will see. All right. Well, Jay, who could have possibly known that losing an election could be so incredibly good for fundraising? It's been pretty amazing. In the wake of the November 3rd presidential election, so just over a month ago, President Trump has raised over $207 million, and much of that has been in the form of small dollar donations in response to around 500 email requests sent to supporters urging them to contribute to a fictitious election defense fund. And if you read the small print in these funding mailers, you'd find out that around 75% of the money will actually be going to President Trump's new Save America leadership PAC, with the rest to be shared between the Trump campaign and the Republican Party committees. And there still are a few remaining legal challenges to the election results, but at this point, the campaign has spent under $9 million on legal fights and recounts. And of course, President Trump still continues to maintain what I guess I could call his pugnacious insistence that he won the election by a lot. And this week he released a wild 46-minute video on his Facebook page in which he claimed that the election system was under coordinated assault and siege, and that it was statistically impossible for him to have lost to Joe Biden. He's wrong about that latter comment, but he's absolutely right that the system is under siege. And of course, it's by President Trump and his legal team in their efforts to overturn what I believe is fair to say is the will of the voters and steal the election.
Well, hold on a second.
Okay.
I do want to draw a line here, and I tried to draw this line a week or so ago too, that between the legal challenges and whatever nonsense Rudy Giuliani or Sidney
Powell
might just spout off.
Sure.
Because there are legal challenges in court, and some of them raise pretty valid issues. Are they of the nature that would overturn an election? No, they're not. But I think that I want to draw on, because there are legitimate challenges to be made. But no,
that's a fair point. Let me ask you something.
But I mean, the challenges that are actually being made in court are not what Powell and Giuliani are talking about, or Trump's talking about.
That's
right?
a good point. And I think, though, if we look at the challenges in court, I think the Trump administration is 1 for 41 or something like that. And so I also think it would be fair to characterize a lot of these challenges as frivolous. I mean, many of them have been laughed out of court essentially by what's that? Sorry.
Low probability.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's certainly I wouldn't call it questionableness, but I see the point you're making in that it's one thing to raise legal challenges, even if they are
not great ones,
ridiculous even. But it's another thing to go to Republican legislatures and have Republican legislators come to the White House and say, "Listen, we would like you to appoint a different slate of electors."
Right. And it seems that neither is likely to happen.
Right.
But no, my point was that the court cases, none of them have really alleged a broad super conspiracy in voting machines and Venezuelans and all of that sort of thing.
Which you wouldn't know from listening to President Trump or Rudy Giuliani.
That's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying is if you compare what's actually being filed in court, they are narrow challenges to, hey, these ballots were supposed to be segregated and they weren't segregated. These districts allowed people to do a fix it if their mail ballot was goofed up, and while others didn't. There are questions of, hey, observers were supposed to be this close, but they weren't. And all those are what we'd call irregularities. And I think they're legitimate questions to raise, because you always want to be raising these questions so that you ensure that there isn't a bigger fraud.
Yeah.
But as I think everybody who has sort of half a brain has pointed out, all of those challenges do not amount to overturning an election.
Right.
So I think I'm just trying to draw that.
No, that's an important.
So
sure.
when you say like he's trying to overturn the election through the courts, well, not really.
No, I didn't say.
People out there saying crazy stuff, and he's got court cases. You are not necessarily the same thing.
I would say he is attempting to overturn the election in any way possible, and if the courts don't work, he's more than happy to do whatever. Though it's pretty clear that at least privately he's come to accept that Joe Biden will be the next president. And, there are these reports about how he's not going to invite Biden to the White House. That would have been an awkward meeting, to say the least. And he won't attend Biden's inauguration, and he may even launch his first big 2024 campaign event on the day Joe Biden is inaugurated. And, I think it was last week or a couple weeks ago that you said you thought that there was a good chance that Donald Trump would kind of pivot and be the most magnanimous presidential transitioner ever.
Yep.
Do you still feel that?
I do.
Really?
I do.
You think he's going to be there at the inauguration and invite Joe Biden in and welcome with open arms, well, masked maybe, but you think all that's going to come to pass?
Whether he'll open, I'm still thinking that, yeah.
Really? Wow. I
think, look, there's a long way to go between now and January 20th.
That's true.
And
here's why I think you're more wrong about this than you have been about almost anything that I can think of, Jay. That's okay. Saying a lot. It's because it's all part of the grander narrative. Any sort of gesture or any sort of thing that could even be taken to imply that Joe Biden is a legitimate president, and that would be attending the inauguration, that would be inviting Biden to the White House, ends up hurting Donald Trump. He has raised, as I said, over $200 million on this bogus election challenge thing. And it's a brilliant move. I have to say, strategically, leadership PACs, for people who don't know, leadership PACs are kind of an abomination. They're essentially slush funds. How it works, well, how leadership PACs are intended to work, I guess you could say, in some perfect universe, is that it's a way for people in leadership positions, or really anyone in Congress or the executive branch, to raise money to give to other candidates.
Right. But what like, for example, it is typically like you're the head of your caucus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyone in Congress can start a leadership PAC.
Would do the leadership PAC and then distribute it to the most needy or deserving of their members.
Right. But it's called a leadership PAC, but you don't have to be a leader to have one. But the catch is, and the specifically purposefully designed catch is, you can spend leadership PAC money on what are called donor support activities. And in other words, so if you want to bring a bunch of people together, at a Trump resort or something like that to solicit some money, well, you can, that's perfectly fine. There's no percentage or limit on that or anything. So another way, it's a way of using other people's money to, as a slush fund, basically, which, Donald Trump's a big fan of other people's money, certainly. And it's, like I said, it's a brilliant strategic move. And I think that anything that is a gesture toward Biden's legitimacy hurts his ability to raise this money. And so that's why I don't think he's going to do that. And not only that, but it's part of that, what I see as the larger Trump strategy to not just raise that money, but also to freeze out potential 2024 rivals. Even if Donald Trump doesn't run again, it still lets him, remain the kingmaker, retain the spotlight.
Yeah, I think all that's right. No, I think you're right on all that. And that's why I don't think it's mutually exclusive, though. I think he can, because he's Trump. I think he can do both. I think he can say, "I was robbed. This is the most corrupt election in history." But you know what? I'm such a good guy. I am still gonna welcome Joe Biden. But you know what? I'm raising money to go beat him the next time. That sort of thing.
Wow. I think
if anybody can pull that off, Trump can.
My jaw dropped, because I think that is just the most colossal misreading. Like I said, I am positive that I've never thought with my whole heart and soul that you are more wrong than you are. And the nice thing, though,
and I may be. Look, yeah. I mean, look, this prediction is not being based on any sort of my political experience or acumen or looking at polls or analysis. This is just my gut feeling for this is how Donald Trump operates.
Yep. And the nice thing is
if he's given the choice of being on TV or not being on TV, he will always choose being on TV.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think his argument is going to be the counter programming would be wonderful, and he's going to get this huge audience and lie about the size and that sort of thing, because apparently what we've been hearing from the Biden from the Biden transition is that the inauguration is going to be, well, at least more virtual than normal. And so I think Donald Trump could say, well, I can gather together a much bigger crowd in real time, maskless, of course, than Biden can. And that would be a great way to sort of demonstrate how much better I am. But again, we will find out in 46 days' time, and one of us will be completely wrong, and the other one will not hold it over the other person, because that's not how we operate. But it will be pointed out.
Here's my other point. And look, I look at this as, again, I'm no, this is the separate question. This is sort of I'm employ some actual media and political analysis and the cold calculations. You do not want to be counter-programming against a presidential inauguration, right? No matter what happens, no matter how big your crowd is, right? The headline will read, President Biden inaugurated, and then below the fold, Trump holds counter rally.
Only in the corrupt fake news mainstream media. I mean, not at Red State, not at Town Hall, not at Newsmax. No, it's going to be
no. And okay, that's you have a point there, but let's look at how big an impact does that does that have? And I just don't see.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to a newsworthiness piece of, here president inaugurated and then ex-president announces campaign.
I think you're showing your age, Jay. We both came up in a very different news era, and I think that, yes, I would totally agree with you if this were the mid-'90s or even the early 2000s, but it's not. And so, this is one of these cases where I once again will say, Jay, I hope you're right, but I think your analysis isn't right because the world is a much worse place than you think it is.
Okay.
But the other point I wanted to ask you is we both seem to agree on the idea that Donald Trump is going to do everything he can to retain control over the Republican Party for the next 4 years. And so what effect do you think this is going to have on the Republican Party and the country over the next 2 to 4 years?
Well, I think the bigger thing what's going to matter is to what extent can Donald Trump generate votes? And a test of that is going to be in Georgia. Because look, Trump can have all the money he wants, and if he can't actually get people elected or get people to turn out, it's not going to matter in terms of having an influence over the party. Can he put in people to run primary challenges? Sure. But the test will be, okay, how many of those challengers actually win? And again, that's a question for 2 years down the road. I think that
I see what you're saying.
Just having a whole lot of money in the bank doesn't mean he's going to have a whole lot of influence. I mean, it could be in certain districts he actually is a negative for some candidates, and
I think that's sort of standard political analysis, but I don't think it's Trump's analysis. I don't think it really matters a whole lot whether or not he can get people elected or bring people to the polls for midterm races or for, down ticket races. I think what matters is the extent to which he can affect the presidential race and use that national following, that very ardent following of, what might be 30% or more of the electorate to be the kingmaker in the presidential primary process. So that's where I see his influence being the greatest, and him maybe again pulling the Republican Party more to the Trumpist populist right, even if he's not the nominee. And I think that's going to be an unfortunate sort of thing, because I would much rather see a Ben Sass type character be the Republican nominee than any of the sort of Trump 2.0 type people who are out there.
Well, I think look, there's always going to be a sort of a center of gravity, right, around that Trumpian voter, and there is going to be that pull towards more populism. I think that's happened, but I think that happened in 2016, right? I don't think that changes based on anything Trump does going forward. And I think you still might be misreading Trump voters and how much personal attachment they have to him. Yeah, they really seem to. But I'm not sure that carries through when he's out of office.
Yeah, I think it does.
Let me just, my example on this is, if you look at Ross Perot in 92, Ross Perot was, essentially a kingmaker, or could have been, right? And George Bush lost because of Ross Perot, got about 20% of the vote. And Perot's message was very much the similar populist message, although delivered less flamboyantly than Trump. And there were all sorts of people like, this is Perot's, this is going to be huge, and he's starting his own party, and this is going to change everything. And he ran in again in 96, and I want to say, I don't know exactly what the Reform Party got, but it was something like in the neighborhood of 3%, right?
I agree with you, and I think. But I think, and again, this is where I think you're misreading, is that the media environment's entirely different. There wasn't even a Fox News when Perot made his first run, and it was just in its infancy when he made his second run. The social media wasn't even a thing. The internet was in its infancy. And so this environment is entirely different. And so when you combine the modern media environment with the far more charismatic nature of Donald Trump, I think it's an entirely different phenomenon. I think Donald Trump is going to be the single most important Republican in the United States for the next 4 years, and that's going to be to the great detriment of the Republican Party and the American political system.
I'm just picturing Trump like he would be quoting the first half of that sentence. Bernanke, I think Donald Trump is the most important Republican politician.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, let's. We mentioned just kind of in passing the Georgia elections, I think, and whether or not Donald Trump can get people elected. And of course, we are recording this on Saturday morning, and Donald Trump is scheduled to be in Georgia today, and nobody knows really what the hell he's going to say or do. Anyone who says they have a clue, I think, is lying, because one thing we know, at least one thing I know, Jay, is that when Donald Trump gets in front of an adoring crowd, anything can really happen. But we shall see. But there's a lot that depends on what happens in Georgia's Senate runoff election. I mean, it goes back to our COVID conversation. Those are on January 5th. And I don't think, Jay, either you or I believe that a Democratic-controlled Senate will end the filibuster and pass sweeping legislation. A 50-50 split would, at the very least, make it considerably easier for President Biden to get his top executive branch and judicial nominations through, right? Yeah. So there's that. But, there hasn't been a ton of polling so far. But from what little we've seen, both races, kind of look to be pretty tight. I mean, Republicans have been directing a lot of their focus on Raphael Warnock and focusing a lot on his comments from some of his sermons as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. And then Republicans have also been arguing, of course, that a Republican Senate will be a crucial check against the Democratic House and president. Though they've kind of had to be a little careful about the Democratic president part, because you don't want to say that and get Donald Trump, President Trump, upset.
Right.
But then on the other hand, Democrats are pointing to what they've been calling, in many cases, corruption from Senator David Perdue, who's been a very active trader and made some seemingly prescient stock trades during his time in the Senate. And Kelly Loeffler as well, less active, but still, at least to some, suspicious trading activity. And the Department of Justice, of course, has investigated them and a number of other senators for insider trading, but they ended their investigations with no charges against anyone except for Senator Barr, and that case seems to be, in kind of a state of suspended animation, though we should point out that it's incredibly difficult to make insider trading cases. And, over the last couple of weeks, then as well, there have been these calls in some pro-Trump circles for Trump supporters to boycott the election. Sidney Powell, said, make it known that you will not vote at all unless your vote is secure. Yeah. And then Lynn Wood, who I don't know where he's coming from, but it's kind of his past is sort of very Democratic, but he's made some really strong arguments, and it should be a pretty interesting race. What do you think about this, Jay?
Well, I'd say I haven't worked in a whole lot of elections, and far be it for me to question the wisdom of these Washington people, but yeah, telling your people not to vote is usually not a good strategy.
Yeah.
So, I think we just kind of take that with a grain of salt. I don't know that I don't know how much that really penetrates out there with the audience that, someone's going to say, yes, this is crooked, I'm not going to vote. Because I think the illogic is pretty self-evident, right?
Yeah.
So
but of course,
I don't think
it doesn't take a lot of people, right? I mean, if it's a close race, if a couple thousand people say, right, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that," that could be that could make the difference in these races.
Yeah, but I mean, my sense is always, are they going to do that, not do that anyway?
Gotcha.
Right. As opposed to just because Sidney Powell said something. But and the other thing that I would point out is, there's a saying that a week is a long time in politics. And we got about 4 weeks till we get to the actual election. So I think that this, I think that telling people not to vote, I don't think that's going to catch on.
No, I certainly it's not going to be a widespread sort of thing. And I say that we don't know what President Trump's going to say. By the time listeners hear this, that we probably will know. But my sense of things, if I had a bet, I would say that he's going to urge people to vote because he realizes that it would certainly be a better thing. And so even though he may say some other things, I think a big part of his message is going to be to urge people to get out to vote. And certainly there are plenty of people in the Republican establishment who are hoping and praying he's going to say that.
Yeah. And look, you can make the argument still say, hey, this is completely corrupt. Look at these crooks. This is terrible. But the only way that you can fix it is to get out and vote.
Right.
So, and that's actually quite honestly, that's been a Democratic talking point for forever. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Going back to, the sort of horrific. This was 2004. That when you don't vote, a church burns. I mean that kind of thing. Or this there's this impression out there that people are trying to disenfranchise you, so you need to go out and vote. Trump is stealing the post office boxes, the mailboxes to prevent you from voting. I mean that kind of stuff. So I think there may be some of that, right? That. That's assuming there's a well thought out strategy, and I think that's probably a pretty generous assumption.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, I think there's a pivot back from you can still have, look at all these crooks, but you should still vote. And I think that's what I'm going to go on record saying I think that's what he will say sometime today.
So, Jay, there's a broader policy issue here, really, I think, and that is the issue of whether or not members of Congress should be allowed to trade individual stocks. And there actually has been legislation proposed, in fact, bipartisan legislation, something this year called the Trust in Congress Act, that would require members of Congress to put their investments into, or certain investments at least, into a blind trust. And I was wondering what you thought about requirements like that, and if you feel that the potential problems for members of Congress with insider trading, in the sense of it can be difficult to know, even from a member of Congress's perspective, what is and is not public information. And is it something that needs to be maybe addressed through some sort of legislation? What do you think?
Well, I think we talked about this last week, and it may have been on the bonus show, so not everybody heard it. But my sense is, look, that's a good idea. That's a good prudential idea that they should put things into a blind trust, because that way there can be no hint of impropriety. Am I in favor of legislation that would require it? No, because I think the better way to handle it is through this sort of the hurly-burly of the political process, right? If these folks have to run, an opponent wants to say, listen, I'm willing to put my assets into a blind trust to show you that I have great integrity and would not trade on information that I might be privy to, and my opponent will not. Then that's a good political push to do that. So that's on. My preference would be to have it done that way, as opposed to legislatively, where they do it, and there's always a way of, well, are they really doing it, or are they cheating, right? But no, I would say the overall wisdom of that being a goal, I think is good.
And I think in a less polarized time, that counting on the voters to take that into account might actually have meant something. But nowadays, it seems like more and more people are saying, I don't care what kind of a crook he is, at least he's not a Democrat, And so
right.
I guess my problem here is, while sort of on a temperamental, fundamental basis, I agree with you, I also feel like I don't want to give members of Congress essentially a free pass to do things that I feel are deeply unethical, simply because they can get away with it thanks to polarization, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I would say again that the goal, and if I were running for the Senate, which you are,
that's right.
Set up that blind trust, So, just because I think that's the smart thing to do politically, and it safeguards you against claims by opponents. So
yeah, I would be
whether it's required or not. Yeah, to me is kind of superfluous.
Yeah, I would definitely be in favor of that, as well as changing the rules about leadership PACs so they couldn't be essentially huge slush funds. Not that would ever pass Congress, but anyway. So yeah, we talked about Bill Barr a little bit at the top of the show, at least you jokingly did. And, Bill Barr has had a big week. Early this week, he announced that the Justice Department found no voter fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. And President Trump, of course, disputes this. And according to a number of administration sources, he's pretty upset with Barr, though I don't know that it will raise to the level of him being fired, given that there are only 46 more days for him to be in that job. But Trump has also been upset with Barr for not moving along the investigation of the Russia probe investigators headed by U.S. Attorney John Durham. And of course, Donald Trump hoped that this would result in a damning report being released prior to the 2020 presidential election. That didn't happen, but this week Barr named Durham a special counsel, which will provide Durham with additional protection from the Biden administration, because a special counsel can only be fired by the attorney general for misconduct, dereliction of duty, or a conflict of interest. And Barr did say that this week that Durham's investigation has been narrowing to focus on the conduct of FBI agents who worked on the Russia investigation. And he's regularly said that former President Barack Obama and Joe Biden are not implicated in Durham's investigation. And also, I should point out that Barr issued Durham's special counsel appointment order on October 19th, but he kept it sealed until this week so as not to have an effect on the election, which I expect is another move that was almost certainly met with some disapproval from the White House. Yeah. So Jay, what do you think about Bill Barr's big week?
Well, my respect for Bill Barr continues unabated. I think these were all sort of the right calls to make. I mean, on the one hand, on the voter fraud issue, it's not even making a call. It's just saying here's what the evidence is. And I think as Attorney General, it's head of the Justice Department, it's absolutely incumbent upon him to see that elections are fair and unblemished, to call out problems where he sees them, but also to make clear the scope of those problems. And I think that's exactly what he did. And that's sort of been the what I've been saying, and I think to some extent you've been saying for months now, is voter fraud does happen, but for it to happen on the scale that the president alleges is very difficult to pull off, and there is at this point no evidence to suggest that it happened. So I think he's correct there, and continuing the investigation and withholding the naming of a special counsel. Again, I think that was the correct thing to do as under Justice Department guidelines, and also just the right thing to do overall, right? Because I think if you are interested in the integrity of the system, and my issue for years now has been, were the law enforcement and surveillance powers, intelligence powers, brought to bear for domestic political reasons. That's a really big and important question, and I think if whatever answer we have to it, it ought to be given outside of the context of an election. If you follow me, I probably didn't state that as well as I could have, but.
I guess here's my problem with I obviously agree with the election part of it, because if there's nothing there, nothing major there, there's nothing major there. And I also agree with you that we've never had any kind of large scale election without certain irregularities, a small amount of fraud. And from the beginning,
maybe 1960, which we could still.
Yeah.
But I just think that's an interesting historical debate to have, but right. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's my problem with the special counsel thing, and it's a legal problem. I looked up the statutes governing this, and the grounds for appointing a special counsel. One of the requirements that has to be met is, and I'll just read the text, that investigation or prosecution of that person or a matter by a United States Attorney's Office or litigating division of the Department of Justice would present a conflict of interest for the department or other extraordinary circumstances. So right there, I have a problem, or at least a question arises to me. If John Durham is to be appointed as special counsel, which he was, then it sounds to me like under the rules governing when a special counsel is appointed, he should have been appointed a special counsel at the very beginning, because how could this be legitimate if it didn't present a conflict back when Barr named him as the investigator, as the U.S. attorney, and now he's a special counsel? That doesn't seem to square with the law, with the legal requirements. And secondly, one of the actual qualifications for a special counsel is that the special counsel shall be selected from outside the United States government. And John Durham, as a United States attorney, is not from outside the United States government. So it seems to me, as a matter of law, this is an illegitimate appointment. And I wanted to get your take on that.
So there's actually, and I've read up on some of this. On some of these legal blogs, there's multiple CFR regulations that would allow for a special counsel, and the ones you're looking at, it's 28 CFR 600.3, and it talks about from outside the government.
And then 600.1 is grounds for appointing a special counsel. Yeah. But there's also 607, which is there is sort of a broad authority for an attorney general to appoint people. And for example, Patrick Fitzgerald was appointed by Jim Comey, even though Fitzgerald was a current U.S. attorney. So there's precedent there that they can be appointed outside of the special counsel regs, right? That the AG has sort of an apparent inherent authority to do that. So I guess it's sort of an open question. What about the other thing, Jay?
But certainly it's not unprecedented.
Well, what about the question of when you do appoint a special? I mean, it seems to me that a special counsel, it's designed for when there would be a conflict or an issue that you couldn't have somebody within the Department of Justice investigating this. So you have that outside person. That's the whole rationale for it. And so if this was that sort of case, how is it that all of a sudden, starting in October, there was this conflict where the Department of Justice couldn't investigate it, but back when Barr appointed a U.S. attorney, there wasn't this conflict? That's what confuses me, and I think that's what makes a lot of people on the left say this seems like very much not a legal thing, but a political move.
Well, I think it goes to the same issue of what authority is he being appointed under? Is it that CFR reg or not?
No, I'm sorry.
Otherwise, I think you can make an argument that, and again, I don't have all the details to make that argument. But if I did, it would go something like this: that we knew more in October than what we knew during the initial appointment. That there may have been a conflict that was not apparent initially, but became apparent as we got more evidence.
And then further, the argument would be that we can't actually say that because we can't explain what that is because it's part of the investigation.
Right. And we can't explain it, and we're not going to release it now, that information before an election, because, the idea that this might be seen as attempting to influence an election.
Well, then I guess I would say, putting the most charitable possible reading on this, that the Justice Department and the Attorney General did a really bad job of messaging on this.
I suppose. I would think you would be happy with Bill Barr this week, though, right? I mean, if for someone who is supposedly a puppet of Donald Trump, I mean, it's certainly has done a lot of things that would seem to be not. If Trump were pulling the strings, he didn't do a very good job of it.
And I've never said, at least if I have, I will retract that. But I've never thought that Barr is a puppet of Trump. I've just felt that he was appointed Attorney General because he had a view of executive power that is very much in line what Donald Trump wants to do.
Enough,
and so you can. So I never thought it was about him having any kind of fealty to Trump, but just about him having a fealty to executive power, I guess.
Yeah.
And I have major issues with that. But no, I mean, I feel like this was it just seems to me that, like I said, even the most charitable reading, that this was a really bad job of explaining what happened and why. And so I think from a practical standpoint, it doesn't matter. And you can even argue that the best possible thing for the Biden administration, which I don't think they're going to do anything, whoever Joe Biden has as his attorney general is not going to relieve Durham of this, even if there is cause. The best thing that's going to happen is just let this go. And right now, at least from what we know, it looks like there's not a whole lot there. There's been one indictment, I believe, for an FBI agent falsifying a document, I think, or something like that. But it's been...
Which was pretty significant, actually.
Yeah, but it's not been the Kraken sort of thing.
Changing to is working for us to is not working for us.
Right, but it has not been the massive deep state conspiracy that many on the right have been screaming about. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot there, really, which is not to say it's not worth investigating, but yeah. So in the end, I don't think this is going to amount to much of anything. I think the report, when it does come out, is going to say, hey, there were some FBI people who did some dodgy stuff, and some of them should be relieved, and I think have been relieved, and that's going to be pretty much the end of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll wait and see what the report says, but I would agree that I don't think the Biden administration would be smart to do it. I agree that I don't think they will try to relieve him of those duties.
Yeah. All right. Well, but before we get to our closing stuff, we haven't done recommendations in a few weeks, Jay, I realize. So why don't we close with that? Do you have any recommendations this week for folks?
So you know what? Usually I try to recommend something kind of highbrow, and this is kind of like sort of highbrow. But
I should point out, Jay, I'm going to interrupt you to say Jay is our resident highbrow person. He is the high culture guy. I am the medium at best to low culture guy, and so Jay,
you once accused me of being a cultural elitist.
There you go. I stand by that accusation.
The reason being was I was not a fan of country music.
And that will be part of my Senate platform. I can tell you that I know the difference between Merle Haggard and Waylon Jennings. And
that was your reason for calling me a cultural elitist. But no, we've been watching The Crown on Netflix. And, I'm someone who is not into the whole, British royalty bit. As an American, I find it just it's just sort of weird, right? And sort of confusing. But I have to say that I really have been enjoying this season. I didn't really watch the other seasons. I kind of sort of did. But now we're like, it's up to the 1980s. So Margaret Thatcher and Princess Di, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm also happy my oldest daughter has gotten this big attachment now to Margaret Thatcher. And following up. So no, I recommend that. I think it's a well done show and interesting historically. There are some pieces of it where liberties have been taken, dramatic liberties have been taken, I think, and there's some good stuff online where you can read about that to sort out what is the actual real true story and what is sort of the again, stuff has to, to make it a good show. But no, I think it's worth watching.
Okay. Well, you went at least middle to high, and I will go low. And my recommendation for this week is a classic, a cinematic classic, The Blues Brothers, 1980 movie with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd that my wife and I watch at least once a year, often more. I've probably seen it 30 or 40 times over the course of my life. And it is, I actually recently realized that there are people in the world who have not seen it. And I realized that when I was looking at a list of the greatest comedies of all time, and it was not on this list, and I was scandalized. The Big Lebowski also wasn't on the list, and so. But anyway, I immediately started thinking about the movie, and I felt a great need to watch it and proselytize about it. And not only is it a great movie, but I believe around 10 years ago, during one of its anniversaries, 35th anniversary, something like that, it was declared a Catholic classic according to the official Vatican newspaper. So it is not just
Pope loves the Blues Brothers.
You know, I would expect that this Pope would appreciate the Blues Brothers, but if you have not seen the Blues Brothers, do yourself a favor and watch it, because it is one of the great movies of all time, not even the great comedies. I put it in my top 5, right up there with one or two of the Godfathers and Apocalypse Now and a few other things. I go dark sometimes, but yes, that is my recommendation, a true cinematic comedy classic, The Blues Brothers.
And I would say that I would count the Blues Brothers in sort of what I would call high culture. I think that is worthy. Yeah.
All right, then. Well, hope you enjoy those recommendations. I hope you enjoyed the show. But we have some things, as always, that we couldn't get to. Like, for instance, we were going to talk about an important case, I would say, about North Carolina's voter ID law, which was upheld by a federal appellate court, and also Donald Trump threatening a veto of the National Defense Authorization Act over Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which you might think those two things aren't related, and you would be mostly right. Anyway, we're going to talk about that and maybe also take some listener questions on the bonus show. And if you are a supporter, you will be getting that midweek. And if you're not a supporter and you'd like to become one, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. And remember, always, if you can't afford to become a supporter, but you want all that stuff, send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I'm happy to get you full access to that second weekly episode. If you'd like to get in touch with us, mail@politicsguys.com. And finally, we would also like to give a special thanks to our executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Chris Wilkerson, and Nathan Sosnowski. We'll be back with a new show next week. We hope you'll join us.